Welcome to Doom Scroll Patrol, the show where we doom scroll so you don't have to. Today, we have a special interview with friend of the show, Peter Kalmus. He's a NASA climate scientist speaking on his own behalf. And today, we are going to be talking about climate change and fascism and a whole bunch of other really, really fun stuff. Stick around, you're not going to want to miss it. I'm Aaron Hagee McKay.
I'm Harold Moss.
I'm Hannah Snape.
I'm Sam Perez.
Let's do
Scroll.
Let's get into it.
Please focus and adjust your sound level here.
There is so much to talk about, and there's a fire hose of news, especially in the media, like Colbert, being canceled. To me is just like yet another sign of fascism because they're going after the comedians.
One of the weird things about that, though, is he still has 10 months. I'm getting canceled in, August, September, in 3 months. So I was sort of jealous when he was like, you have 10 more months? That's great.
You got it easy.
Anyways, Peter, it is good to see your face, and amongst all the faces, I just want to take a moment to just
finally
feel
some weirdly long time to make it happen.
Peter, we've been trying to get you on this show for a couple of months now, and things just didn't work out a few of the times. We're so glad to have you here.
Yeah, you made us all look like assholes by now.
Yeah, we're like, we're gonna have Peter Kalmus on.
Peter, guys.
So for the people who don't know, Peter Kalmus is a climate scientist at NASA, but today he is speaking to us as a citizen of the United States of America and a father and just a regular guy. So I just wanted to make that clear because, there's a whole issue with speaking out of turn and all that stuff.
Yeah,
and
you guys have no idea how regular I am.
Yeah. So regular. Well,
he's a vegan. It helps.
You got to be feeling the pressure from your job is in jeopardy from how outspoken you are.
Oh man, it's more than in jeopardy now, Aaron. We can talk about that too.
So what's the update on that? Have you been officially canceled at NASA?
No, but I don't know. I think about 2 months ago or 6 weeks ago, something. I got an email that said there's a mandatory return to lab order. So I worked fully remote for 3 years. I've been fully remote, living in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and my lab JPL is in Pasadena, California, where I lived for 14 years. Basically, Altadena, the place that burned down in January. So we could talk about that too. And they said if I don't go back full time, 5 days a week onto the lab in Pasadena, then it will be considered a resignation. And so I won't even get severance. So yeah, thanks a lot. So it's a way to lay off a large fraction of the workforce without giving any severance. And I have until October 29th to move back there. So I've put in a request for an exception, but I don't think I'll get it because they made it clear that they basically weren't going to listen to any exceptions.
No, we won't allow it.
What is it like working at NASA when you have the president of the United States as such a vehement, not even climate denier, but he's actively hostile towards anything?
Sucks. Yeah. So it's there's just so many complicated layers there. So last night I watched a little bit of this show called For All Mankind. And it's this kind of glorification of NASA show. There's a lot of these, right? And first of all, I want to start by saying, as a tiny little kid, I would read all of this crazy science fiction and sort of dream about working at NASA. So when I finally got the job there, it was amazing. And to see how it's being destroyed by this fucking numbskull of a president is just so heartbreaking to me, because it's not just a national treasure, it's a world treasure. NASA is freaking amazing, and the stuff that it's been doing up until now has been so much more than just going to the moon. It's been about doing science. It's been about exploring the other planets of the solar system. It's been about exploring deep space, and of course it's been about understanding and monitoring climate change, which is an absolutely critical thing to do. The satellites that monitor our planet are irreplaceable. You just can't get all of the information we get from space from like walking around on the Earth. You just get this like satellite's eye view of all of this stuff happening on the Earth system. And then to have long records of that so that you can actually monitor changes is so important. And I feel like we're on the precipice of losing all of that because frankly, there's no other space agency in the world that comes close to doing what NASA and to some extent what NOAA have been doing. And they're both getting the axe because this like absolute idiot of a president doesn't see what's happening on the planet right in front of his own eyes. His whole party is like this emperor has no clothes party, right? Where they just like, it's mine as a scientist. It's kind of crazy to me when people aren't convinced by evidence. Like if there's solid evidence and there's no evidence to the contrary, you should accept it. But it's even worse when people can't like believe what's happening in front of their own eyes because they're so propagandized and they're so yeah, the whole thing is heartbreaking. Science is kind of fascism is kind of the natural enemy of science. Because science is about understanding reality. It's about understanding what's happening for real. And fascism is all about creating this world of alternative facts and this like kind of mythic world of like going back to some like better patriarchal past where the women stay in the kitchen and, nobody challenges the dear leader and the people in power get more and more of that power. Right. So yeah, it's not surprising that these fascists are doing everything they can to crush out science.
You brought up the F word. I think we talk about fascism here a lot because we're all just. I think a lot of people are not dealing with it. I've talked to a number of people, some American friends of mine, who are just they don't want to say the word because it's almost like there's a duty to respond if it's real, and they're all in this weird denial mode as well. And I think that sort of pairs nicely with climate denial as well. It's like you want to be talking about climate change, but we also have this elephant in the room.
I pitched a New York Times piece, which they didn't take. I wanted to write an op-ed about how this sort of like this anti-fact, alternative fact, anti-science kind of like people not being able to just like the half of America, like working off of a completely different set of information and that's completely separated from reality, how climate denial was kind of like an early phase of that and how I've been dealing with that for almost 20 years. Right. And it's just been so surreal to just see how people's brains just go wandering off into, because of hate and because of fear, basically, to be honest, their brains go wandering off into this weird tribal place where they just like, it's like a collective mental illness because there's no way to talk them out of it. It's a very weird, I would say like it's like this bug in the human brain. And I think our brains evolved this way somehow. It was in our distant past, there was an evolutionary advantage to this, but now it's just this like, I don't know. It's like a way to hack. It's like a hack that fascists can use to, yeah.
Yeah, with this one simple hack, you can take over the world.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, people like Daniel Kahan, they point to this as like a identity protective cognition. Once you created this tribal mentality in people become allergic to facts that get away from that tribal reality because back in our evolutionary past, to go against the group was fatal. So it was just better to go along with everybody else. And I feel like we're kind of doing that on a planetary scale now, and it's dangerous.
But yeah, I'm speaking out on this podcast, and I've been speaking out on the Substack, and I've been speaking out in the New York Times and every place I can because I think that's so important right now. And when I see people speaking out, speaking from the heart, without fear of these fascists, it inspires me, and it gives me my faith in humanity has been so challenged over these last 20 years, and then especially over these last 6 months. And so the few people who are speaking out and who aren't holding back, to me, they're like they're beacons in the dark, basically. So I want to be like that too.
Come and meet our saviors.
You wrote on your Substack about the Yale professors who study fascism.
Yeah.
They're now fleeing to Canada. I think most of them going to the University of Toronto.
Yeah.
Which you're welcome to come to, by the way.
I would love to be honest.
We can come hang out. We can go get burritos. It'd be great. But you
Canada.
You say you're staying to fight. Why is that?
Well, it's complicated. I'm struggling to know just what fighting means right now. To me right now, it's really protesting and speaking out and maybe doing more sort of the kinds of protest actions that I've done in the past. So I don't quite know what that means. I'm not, if I feel, this is a kind of a weird thing to say. I do kind of hope I can stay here. I am still cautiously optimistic that we are going to ultimately prevent this, kind of eventually thwart this like tragic slide into authoritarianism. So I'm still cautiously optimistic. If I feel like, in the next few days, there's going to be a bunch of goons coming to my, door and like kidnapping me away in the night, I will try to get out of the country before that happens. But, I don't want to encourage everybody to flee. At the same time, like my whole life, thinking back to Nazi Germany, I was always like, wow, if I'd been a Jewish person in 1933, 1934, saw all of this stuff happening, I would have like gotten the hell out of there. And it's not so easy though, right? In practice, because again, like I don't have any connections at the University of Toronto. Just even the logistics of it seem really hard. A lot of people can't do that. A lot of people don't have the money to do that. So, it's kind of this sense of united we stand. Like if enough of us can start speaking out, and if that can bubble up to the institutional level, right? There's been so little resistance by our institutions, which has been really discouraging. There's been some really interesting and good resistance, like from individuals. But aside from Harvard, it's hard. I'm hard pressed. And now like it looks like they might be in the process of starting to, lick Donald Trump's boots and other parts of him. I hope that doesn't happen, but it looks like it might be happening, right? And so it's unclear. I don't know. It's complicated. I would like to stay. I don't really know what fighting looks like. I would give my life for this planet if there was a way I knew that would be actually helpful. But like I would rather live if like getting kidnapped in Guantanamo by these assholes, like somehow that was like the thing that made the difference, then I'd be all for it. But I think what would happen is that like there would be by that point so many people it would be happening to that no one would even notice. So I don't want that to happen if it's just a waste. You know what I mean?
He's going to sacrifice himself.
I have a friend who's like, in our proposals, they do Control F searches now to like take away funding. So we're like, we should just call it Chlormich And then
Chlormich.
All right, let's switch to Chlormich. The United States has really had some wallops. It's been walloped a few times. I mean, there was the Texas floods recently, but also Altadena, where you used to live, got decimated with wildfires. There's been a lot of other things. What do you make of people's reaction to this? What is it like watching these places, burn while everyone else is just sort of...
I don't think anyone's connecting the dots in the way that they should be yet. So I've been, for many, many, many years, I've been really frustrated, for example, by the mainstream media. Almost seems like it makes you sound like a conspiracy theorist to just say the phrase mainstream media. Well, we need a word to talk about like all the magazines, the newspapers of record, the like main television shows. It's unclear to me how many people are still getting their news from these like big outlets, but I think it's still pretty significant. So anyway, I've been really frustrated that they fail to, whenever there's like a big flood or a big fire or a big heat wave or whatever climate impact, they very rarely point out that it's mainly caused by fossil. So they will say it's climate change, like fairly often, like not as often as they should. They should be saying that 100% of the time. But then they need to go 3 more steps. They have to say it's caused by fossil fuels. They the fossil fuel industry has been lying its ass off for the last half century. I think that's an important part of the story, right? Like a journalistic integrity. They have to tell the whole story. So how can you talk about a climate flood in Texas without talking about the fossil fuel industry? And how can you talk about the fossil fuel industry without saying that they've been lying their asses off and systematically blocking action by bribing politicians and spreading lies for half a century? Like, that's part of the story. And then the third thing they have to say that they haven't been saying is that here's how much worse it's going to get in the next 10 years, in the next 20 years, looking into the future. Like, this is not the new normal. It's just, this is the 2025 waypoint, and we're on this trajectory towards much worse of this kind of impact in the future. So this is still just the beginning. And even the New York Times just falls on its fucking face over and over again. It just fails. Like, after the 100th time they fail to talk about this stuff, I'm almost like, maybe they don't want to talk about it, you know? Maybe they have a financial interest in not talking about it. So it makes you wonder, like, if they claim to sit on the journalistic high horse and have all of this journalistic integrity, and yet they're leaving out these three absolutely critical parts of the story that would help the public make sense of all of this, then you have to start to wonder why it's been so hard to like make these points for me, like to make these points in a way that actually gets to people's ears, right? Because I just don't, you know, compared to a lot of climate people, I have a relatively big platform. But if you look at the percentage of ears that my words are actually reaching, it's tiny, right? Yeah. So that's been very frustrating.
Well,
one last
Peter,
question
did you forget the fourth part, which was Joe Biden's weather machine that they keep pushing the button? I mean, that part. Yeah, I
and
think
it's
that's
caused
a major
by
one.
Jewish space lasers.
I mean, I think that it's, you know, when we talk about a conspiracy, part of the reasons to challenge conspiracy theories is that they are about they're the opposite of Occam's razor, right? They're overly complicated rabbit holes that people can dive down and get lost in. The conspiracies we're talking about are all quite known.
Yeah.
Right? And when we look at the rise of fascism globally, you cannot disentangle that from fossil fuel money.
No,
like, quite literally, all of the foundations of the growth of fascism, the Heritage Foundation, Alec, who wrote all the fossil fuel laws, all of this came out of like the Koch brothers, who was was coal money, comes out of all of the right-wing think tanks that have been laying the basis for all of this, is fossil fuel.
For decades. They've been planning all this for decades.
And every petrostate, right? So including
you get the Saudis,
Canada.
you got Russia,
you got
Canada's
Saudis, you got Russia, Canada, all of it. It's so the climate catastrophe and the climate disinformation is actually at the root of everything that we're facing. And I think it's because global capitalism runs on fossil fuels.
Still does.
And there's so much profit there, and it's been so easy that while theoretically global capitalism could and should and probably eventually will run on clean energy, there's so much entrenched interest in this one core of it that everything else flows from that. And
it's like a money printing machine. They just get to like stick a straw in the ground and it turns into money for them. So like, if you look at all the billionaires that basically control the levers of power now, their money is intergenerational. And a lot of it can be traced directly to fossil fuels, right? But even more broadly, like this rise of fascism has made something really clear to me that I think was starting to emerge, but now it's super clear, which is that there is no climate movement anymore. Because all of this stuff, we've always been talking about intersectionality, but now, like you said, you can't disentangle climate breakdown from fascism. Those two things, unfortunately, I'm afraid they're going to just become more and more interlinked going forward, which is a very bleak thing to look to the future at, but they're so linked. This is the culmination of hundreds of years of what I call extractive colonial capitalism. So the indigenous genocide, slavery, genocide in Gaza, all of this shit is connected because it's ways that the billionaire class, the people controlling the levers of power for hundreds of years have gain that control through enclosure, through enclosing bodies, through killing the people who like weren't on the same page with them. And here we are a couple hundred years later, and the planet is overheating, and fascism is rising, and AI is starting to take over everything, making things get hotter. You know, I'm surprised there hasn't been, again, like this is, I don't know, I don't want to sound paranoid, but I suspect the billionaires, if I was a billionaire and I wanted just more and more, so it's a kind of, billionairism is kind of mental illness in my view, right? Like I would love to live in a world where nobody wanted to be a billionaire, where everyone was like, God, that's the stupidest fucking idea I've ever heard, to like just have all the wealth for yourself and have like a whole bunch of people hating you and wanting to kill you. Like how dumb is that?
The Greeks had a word for it called pleonexia.
Yeah, it's like a mental illness. But so if I imagine myself being one of those guys, the thing that I'd be a little worried about guillotines, and I'd be worried about my police force, because what are the police really, right? We can talk about ICE a little bit later, because that's like the fascist police, and that's when the police, the state violence starts to merge with, your, I don't know what you want to call it, the fascist violence of your base, right? There's a reason ICE is wearing masks, right? Because the society's been permeated with violence in a way where you can't tell what's state violence and what's just your asshole neighbor who's been wanting to bring out his guns for the last 20 years, right? So there's a merging, and I think that's something that happens commonly in fascism. But anyway, if you're a billionaire, you might be worried about whether your police force would ultimately turn on you, right? So and now I think there's a real possibility of having like AI powered robots.
Oh,
so
you're not joking. No, it's not a joke, man. This is the plan, because
it seems like that. I haven't seen a lot of articles talking about this, but it's something that I think about sometimes, where, at least in the past, revolution was possible because, it was possible for the billionaire class to go too far. I wonder if that's in the future, that's going to be much harder to have happen. So I don't know.
Well, viva la revolution.
Final question before sort of throwing it to the panel, and maybe we'll get into some news.
Okay. Did not expect to go in that direction, by the way.
No, this was good. I think just to sort of land on climate change, and you made a good point how it's not a separate issue anymore. This is interlinked with everything else, and I think in order to solve climate change, we have to solve everything else at the same time. And so David Suzuki, who is a big name here in Canada, he is a scientist. He was the host of a show called The Nature of Things for decades. And he's like 89 now, and he like goes on the media and he's just doesn't give a shit anymore. And like he just flat out said it's too late to fight climate change in a sense. Like, I mean, he's basically saying that it's already here. Like, we've passed all of these planetary boundaries. If you look at the work of Johann Rockström, we're talking not just carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. The only one we've done something about is ozone. But everything else we're kind of fucked on is the main takeaway that a lot of people will have thought about. You've been accused of being a bit of a Cassandra doomer. I don't know what this is. How do you respond to that? Do you have that sort of pessimistic view, or do you have some sort of hopeful pessimism?
Well, the people who have accused me of being a quote unquote doomer are people who like to, I think in a lot of cases, like to essentially profit off of spreading false hope. Like they don't understand how bad things are, or they just like their brains want to cling to whatever sort of hope they can get. And so they'll like write a book or something and it'll be a bestseller because it's a feel good thing, right? Like, oh, like there's a lot of hope. Here's why, like, climate change, we're going to solve climate change really easily, et cetera, et cetera. So don't lose hope. At the same time, I fucking hate the whole it's game over narrative, and my brain just doesn't work that way. And it's super frustrating to me that somebody of the caliber of David Suzuki would say that, to be honest.
Yeah.
I had a lot of respect for him over the years, but it's just not true. And so again, as a scientist, I hate it when things that aren't true get more traction than things that are true. It's like my sensibility is just like, oh, why? And so what's true? and actually just before this call, I was looking at the Scientist Rebellion general chat, which is something on Signal, which is something I don't do because it's just overwhelming. There's just so many messages. But somebody mentioned the David Suzuki thing, and my response was, I hate that framing. What's really happening is every day things get a little bit worse, and until we transition away from fossil fuels, that's going to be true. But once we do transition away, with like there's a little bit of a lag. But once we transition away, we're in a regime where every day, or you don't want to use the word regime, an epoch, where every day, an era where every day things get a little bit better, right? And I hope to live long enough to see that happen. And I think that until the rise of fascism, I was like this at this level, I was a lot more hopeful that I would live to see that happen. It's going to be a fuck ton of work because we need to build the movement to be strong enough to basically defeat the fossil fuel industry, right? And I always view that as being possible as climate impacts got worse and worse, as people started to realize the stuff that I said earlier that the media should be reporting. I'm a little less hopeful now because it turns out that fascist propaganda works a lot better than I ever thought it could. Right. So growing up, like a lot of people, I think I was like, how could the Nazis happen? Right. And now, unfortunately, it's all too clear how the Nazis could happen because propaganda, people are so full of hate. They're so full of fear and they're so susceptible to propaganda. It's like a set point, right? Like humans could have been half as susceptible to propaganda as we actually are. And then we wouldn't be having all of these problems. But until we can get the movement that's strong enough to defeat the fossil fuel industry, solve all of these systemic problems like getting money out of politics, it's not clear how we're going to make this transition. I mean, the market might eventually just do it, right? The market's still kind of chugging along. Like we have a fascist in office here who's deeply and frankly anti-market, right? All the fossil fuel interests in the United States are socialism for billionaires, right? But China weirdly is kind of in some ways letting the market kind of have the invisible hand of the market is working over there, and they're eating our lunch in terms of things like solar panels and electric battery technology, electric cars. So that could eventually, the transition could happen despite the fossil fuel industry. There's a chance it could happen even without the movement getting as strong as I've always thought it should get. But yeah, that's, I don't know. I hate being labeled as a doomer. I think it's just a way to silence me. And for the, there's just this like really there's a few really unfortunate schisms within the climate movement, and the whole like don't sugarcoat things so that people have hope, because otherwise they're not going to do anything, right? On the one hand, versus the real doomers, the kind of like it's game over, or the kind of people whose brains are like, how many? I get asked this sometimes, like, how much time do we have? Like do we have 2 more years? I'm like, that's not how it fucking works, right? Yeah. So a lot of people just like want this like really black and white, like here's the line after we're fucked, and I think it's like a way again to kind of relinquish responsibility, right? And so it's a sort of it's a kind of mental laziness, which ultimately means I can be so freaked out before that line that I don't do anything because I'm freaking out, right? How can I do anything if I'm freaking out like this and scared all the time? And then after that time, well, it's too late, so I still don't have to do anything. I think my framing, where it's like, here's the reality, where every day we're burning more of this fossil fuel, so every day we're emitting more carbon dioxide. Every day the planet's getting a little bit hotter. That's the truth, right? Yeah, there's tipping points. We're getting closer to them. I think there's a lot of tipping points, right? And the social tipping points too, like fascism in the US. So it's like this kind of like gradual, there's no apocalypse. There's no like one moment where there's an apocalypse. This is why like all climate fiction TV series, they tend to approach climate change in this sort of I don't know, sideways way, where like, for example, the thing that causes the apocalypse, like in Station 11, for example, is a virus, right? There's an epidemic, because it's very hard to dramatize and to tell a story about an apocalypse that is unfolding over 100 years and that's hitting, you know, the poorest first, people in developing countries, the most vulnerable people, and it just slowly starts to like take down more and more systems in your country until, you know, eventually you die too, right? You get caught up in it. But for the people who've already died, either directly or indirectly because of climate heating, the apocalypse has already happened for them, right? And that's been going on for a long time. And then you can trace it back to extractive colonial capitalism and look back, you know, basically over the last hundreds and hundreds of years, and it's all connected. So I don't know what to say. It's disappointing. It's not game over. In my view, it's never going to be too late to fight. The planet is incredible. There's still a lot of life on this planet, in case you haven't noticed. I wish it was doing better. I wish it was flourishing more. I wish there was more biomass in, you know, wild mammals than in cows, like once upon a time there was. I wish the Amazon forest was healthy and thriving, and the coral reefs and all of that. But so there's a lot to grieve. There's already been a lot that's lost, but there's still a ton to save too. And so, you know, I don't think there's ever going to be a time where it's worth it to stop fighting.
And I think, you know, to throw in some things, first of all, when we talk about people's susceptibility to propaganda, that's obviously very real. But what we're really talking about is systems of power. And that's this unprecedented concentration of wealth, that the control over the fossil fuels that ran the entire global economy allowed, and the really susceptible ones are, as we're seeing, is the social institutions, right? So the New York Times, it's not an accident about how they don't really fully talk about climate change and the culpability of the fossil fuel industry. They also, apparently, children die every day in Gaza. Who's responsible? You'll never know from reading a headline in the New York Times.
They just died.
They just die. They just starve. They get bullets in their bodies. They get bombs on their tents and their hospitals. And it just happened somehow. These are not accidental, right? And there's not really a coincidence that Israel is in the Middle East, where the biggest deposits of oil are, and why there's been such a support and interconnection with Israel, right? So social institutions are made by people who obviously value their wealth, their power, and their privilege. And so they are the easiest to buy. And that's been across the board. People are not as easy to buy as all of that. And you can even see it now. Trump's immigration stuff, wildly unpopular. Trump's pretty much everything he's doing is wildly unpopular. It's part of the reason of authoritarianism, why you need it, is that you get to do the awful things even when nobody wants you to do it. The authoritarians don't stay in power because people love them. They stay in power because of the boot. And why do you need the boot? Because what you're doing is actually unpopular. Now, that's depressing when you're under a boot. But the other side of it is, the other side of it is that people don't necessarily just buy into it. So it's about social struggle. It's about actually shifting that balance of power.
Well, so I was just going to point out that, like, when Hitler was appointed chancellor in 1933, he was actually wildly popular. Even students in the university thought he was great, which is very different than Trump right now. Like, that was a big advantage that Hitler had that Trump doesn't really have. But a lot of Trump's base, a lot of the MAGA base really do love him. Like, I was riding back on a train from DC back to Durham the day after the inauguration. And I was sitting in the cafe car, and the people, like, it was filled up with MAGA people who were coming back from the inauguration. The amount of money they'd spent to go there, and the love, he's got a cult. He's got a cult. There's a cult. They were conflating him with Jesus, like, literally. Like, they saw him as a savior. I was just sitting there trying to work, but really just like overhearing their conversations. It was kind of shocking. My mom, unfortunately, is a Trump supporter. And she told me after his first term that he was the best president that this country has ever had. So there's his popularity isn't that high, but he does all of this stuff. It's just because of the propaganda, he can take away healthcare from somebody, and that person who's dying because he literally took away their healthcare won't blame him, right? And that's what's fucked up. Like there's this informational disconnect. Everything right now is about kind of information and tribalism, and it's very hard to see a way out of it. And that's why you all do what you do too.
That's why I think it's important to realize that it's not overwhelming support, because that is a big difference. That is a big difference.
Yes,
More people see through it despite the institutional rot and buy-in. And that's important, because that is why there is hope going forward. It's not given.
Huge reason why.
We could lose. And I would say, and we've talked about this, our whole last one was about Mamdani's campaign in New York, which I think is a golden counterpoint to doomerism, in not the way that you've been accused, which is I would say people accusing you of doomerism, Peter, what they're accusing you is of scientific literacy and accuracy. Like you lay out the problems that they are, and sometimes you're sad about it.
Yeah.
And that's why people connect, because you're not afraid.
You have an emotion.
You're not afraid to connect the emotional reality of processing this. And I think that's one of the roles you have is kind of being able to combine the science and emotional processing. That's not doom. That's just fucking reality. However, what Mamdani did, and I think it's a counterpoint to the actual doomerists and the cynics and the you can't do anything, which is, first of all, he broke from the Democratic parties, because he's to the left of the Democratic Party. He broke from the idea that you can't challenge the status quo. You can't challenge the narrative. Okay, don't speak up on Gaza because that's going to cost us the election, although the inverse is most likely true. Don't speak up against our donor class because that's going to cost us elections. Instead, he said, let's speak up on what actually matters and try and be as honest as we can, but do it with hope. And he framed climate. He's going to be one of the most effective climate mayors when he gets into office, because fuck it, we're getting him over that finish line.
I mean, you gotta cross them fingers. Don't jinx it.
No, I'm not going to jinx it. It's like these. Fortunately, all we've got is billionaire ego bashing morons. Although Sliwa came up with a great thing on Andrew Cuomo this week, which is he's just slapping fannies and killing grannies. I'm going to give Sliwa the killer quote on Cuomo: slapping fannies and killing grannies. But is that it's a quality of life issue, and that it does connect with people's daily quality of life right now. And then last week in New York, of course, our infrastructure was overwhelmed and the subways flooded because they were built for pre-climate change levels of rainfall.
Yeah.
Like that is a quality of life issue. So what does it mean? Free buses, free transit, walkable cities, congestion pricing, green standards in new public housing for denser housing and walkable communities. All of those things are the things that people actually want. This is what people want. This is why people move to cities, right? So you can connect with people's actual aspirations, with their day-to-day quality of life, but you've got to challenge wealth and power to do so. Right. That's the model that I think is, and they're building a movement. I mean, they got 10,000 new people in the Democratic Socialists of America in New York City alone. We're seeing what happens when you build a movement that actually has some principle to it.
So, and there's something the Trump administration has taught me is that when a government wants to, it can make radical change real fast.
Yes.
Right. So I've been so frustrated by Obama and by Biden because it's like the Democrats have power and yet they're choosing not to do anything about climate change because they say like, oh, it's, I don't know, like what kind of, they don't really give excuses why they're not doing anything. They just kind of like gaslight and like.
Well, they say they are doing something. I mean, they have the Inflation Reduction Act and that was hard to get by, but they're also like, they also increase
fossil fuels at the same time and they brag about it. Like the thing is they're part of the, the Democrats, they're obviously not as bad as the Republicans. Like fuck Chuck Schumer, have to say that at least once in this podcast. So they're not as bad as the Republicans, but
let's just do a round. Fuck Chuck Schumer. Fuck Chuck Schumer.
Fuck Chuck Schumer.
Yeah. So, but the corporate Democrats, the ones who refuse to endorse Mamdani, right? Those fuckers. They don't want to make a world that's better for the working class. What they want is to preserve their own privilege and wealth and access to power and status. That's all they want. And that right there is corruption. Like, it's one of the most challenging aspects of being human is that you want people that are making these decisions for the collective good to actually value the collective good and want to do what's best for the collective good. But once you get up there, it's so easy to use that position to preserve, protect, and grow your own wealth, your own status, your own privilege, that it attracts those kinds of people. Or maybe people get into it and then they realize that they can kind of like accrue in these sort of capitalistic extractive ways, right? They're at the top of the food chain. So you always end up with people in charge, like the corporate Democrats, who don't really have the best interests of the working class at heart. And then you have a really disaffected working class, and you end up with basically with fascism. You end up with growing wealth disparity, right? As the wealth gap gets bigger and bigger, that's one of the key indicators of kind of the oncoming of fascism, right? So it's all connected. But man, like, if we had people in power that wanted to do something about climate change, it would happen so fucking fast. It would like blow everyone's minds.
I mean, look what happened.
We have
with COVID.
everything we need to stop it. You know, like, it's such a tragedy that we're still accelerating the overheating of planet Earth. When if we, and I think the vast majority of humans on Earth at some level do get, like, I think like the statistic is like 80% want, recognize that climate change is the problem globally and want more to be done about it, right? So there is this kind of growing realization that the way things are is fucked up. But then you have the billionaire class, the people at the top that are just, and they're using things like the mainstream media outlets, right? They're controlling that too. Then they're tamping down, they're kind of gaslighting and preventing this growing desire for change and keeping it from happening. It's very frustrating.
Yes, Prince John sent Dickon to Kent Row Tavern last night to kill the king.
I haven't been saying much this recording session because I've just been really enjoying listening to you guys, and I don't have the insights that you have to really add value to the conversation, but I'm really good at thinking about things. But anyways, okay, but throughout this conversation I've been trying to think about ways to bridge the gap between people who are fed completely false information and they have this barrier that they just can't get past, and all these systems of power, and then we have to dismantle all of these huge things that are ingrained in every part of our society. It seems like this huge thing, like, how could we possibly tackle this? And I think not trying to figure out exactly the steps right now because maybe we don't know them, but I think maybe it'd be helpful to examine why this happens and how we got there and the layers. My thoughts are scattered, but these big institutions that run things are groups of people. They're organizations, they're committees, they're boards, they're people having conversations with each other. And I've been studying some business ethics and stuff, and these huge scandals and these huge ethical dilemmas that happen with companies, it usually always tracks to the culture and just the way that the company acts as a group of humans, whether they have conversations, whether people are allowed to disagree with other people, whether there's the freedom to actually discuss things, and may have just lost my track of mind. But I just think it's really interesting that so many huge issues just come down to the way that people interact with each other. And it makes me think about empathy. When people lack empathy for other people's situations or things that they just have no experience with, or that it doesn't affect them. So why would they care? And I feel like that has to do with climate change too. Like, are we going to have to wait until like families in the suburbs are starting to actually be negatively affected by this, and not just these small areas that are getting catastrophes, you know? Like, how long is it going to take before it starts actually affecting enough people that they actually care, you know? Like,
well, there's a reason why they explicitly, the right wing is taking on empathy as an illness. They call it like toxic empathy as an actual term, because I think you're absolutely right. When you empathize,
discussed earlier the sin of the
sin of empathy. Yep. Right. When you empathize with children and people and everyone in Gaza, you want to challenge the institutions and the power that's allowing that. When you empathize with migrants, you start to say, why do we have masked thugs snatching people off the street? Empathy is actually extremely powerful. It's extremely powerful, but it has to be hooked up to that it's not just the people, because you could actually replace all those boards. Yeah. It's the institutions of power, and it's the wealth. Wow. And frankly, those are the backs that we need to break. And there are some key areas, which is reversing Citizen United, which in the United States, which allowed unlimited dark money into politics. You know, there's a range of ways that they have been able to use that wealth to control public policy here, and that impacts the entire world.
Hannah, there's so much to what you said. Like, I don't think we're going to have time to like unpack everything. One thing that strikes me is that when you see a climate impact happen, like in the fires in Los Angeles or the floods in Texas, in the aftermath, you usually see like this kind of like outpouring of empathy, which seems to like more or less kind of like politics is like temporarily put on hold. And like everyone kind of comes together to help each other out. And so that does give me sort of hope. And I think the thing that really defeats empathy is this kind of fascist othering, right? So like if you can like Gaza and Israel is like such a good example of this. If you can dehumanize the other and cause your group of people to view them as monsters, as other than human, then it's easy to kind of like remove all empathy from the equation. And I think that's necessary before you can have a genocide like this. So
because ultimately it's fear, right? It's ultimately like you have to have a fear of the other, because they can be other to you and just be like, they're cool. But like no one's really doing that when you're trying to erase other people.
Fear is super exploitable. And somehow we have to figure out collectively how to address that fear and how to allow. Right. And so this is the real reason, I think, why the huge gap in wealth equity, like when you have the rich people having so much more than the working class, then it's real, like the working class starts to feel really insecure naturally. And so they start to become much more fearful. They don't know if they're going to have the medical attention or the food or the shelter, the safety that they need going forward. So they're much more susceptible to the propaganda of fear then, and to the othering that happens. So it's very important to somehow to share the wealth, literally, right? And that's what's such a problem with the billionaire class being in charge, because that's the last thing they want to do. This mental illness, billionaires, and they just want more and more and more for themselves. And that means less and less for the masses, for the working class, for normal people. And then it's very easy unfortunately, for fascism.
There's this, I don't know if I brought this up before, but there's this episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation where the Enterprise is hit with a beam that erases everyone's memories, so they don't know who they are. They know what to do. They know like how to operate the ship and stuff, but they don't. All hierarchy is erased. Mm-hmm. And they're all just kind of trying to figure out what to do together. And they're like very cooperative still and everything. And I wonder what would happen if that were to happen to everyone on Earth here. We don't know who we are. We don't know what status or position we have. We don't know what money is or how to use it. Yeah. But like we're all here and we have to survive together. I don't know if that's like we should work on creating some sort of memory erasing beam together
Really?
and test it out.
You're about to have some time, Peter, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, what are the boys at NASA doing? And girls.
One more really quick comment though about your thoughts, Hannah. Again, like it is a system that has evolved essentially over hundreds and hundreds of years. You know, capitalism's probably the best word for it. I think it's possible there are ways to do capitalism that aren't this bad, but it's intrinsically unstable because the way we do it, our economy depends on continual exponential growth, which is just fucking insane. And the more money you have, the more money you get, because that money also grows exponentially, right? So the wealth disparity is built into the system that we have now, which means it's inherently unstable because you end up getting things like fascism and climate change. And also if you're the CEO of a fossil fuel corporation and you suddenly were like, hey, this sucks. I don't want to be evil. I like having a livable planet. I want to transition my company to not do fossil fuels anymore, instead to do things like solar panels, wind, alternatives, and like help us transition. Guess what happens? You get fired, right? And they replace you with some like dumbass who all they want is money, like a money zombie. So it's like systemic lack of empathy or something like that. Have you ever read, do you know who Donella Meadows is?
Vaguely familiar, but not.
Yeah, she wrote, everyone should read this essay she wrote. It's pretty short, called Places to Intervene in a System. And
leverage points.
Yeah, leverage points, places to intervene in a system. And she goes through like from the least powerful interventions to the most powerful. The most powerful one of all is to change the goal of the system, right? So if we had a system, like a collective system, call it an economic system if you want, whatever, social system. If we had, right now the goal of the system is to hoard as much wealth as possible, to extract, right? If again, look at the billionaires, the way they got to be billionaires was by basically enclosing spaces in nature of the earth, fossil fuels and other stuff too, not just fossil. A lot of it is fossil fuels, but they enclose the natural world, so they own it, and then they extract without giving a fuck about what they're killing, who they're killing, what species are going extinct. They just extract. And, literally with like bulldozers, they rip away the overburden of like life and get at the stuff underneath that they can then monetize and preserve all this power for themselves. So that's the current goal of the system, to just hoard as much wealth, to like grow as much as possible in this one very weird way, which is to get more money, right? If the goal of the system was for everyone to be happy, to share the wealth, to not have income disparity, to not have anybody want to be a billionaire, and to want other species and the planet overall to thrive. Like if that was the goal, the well-being of all, things would change a lot. Like the whole system would change. But it's just, how do you get there? I don't know.
I think part of it, I mean, we can risk and go into this risk having this be like an 1,000-minute conversation, but part of it I think is like we have a system.
Also, we need Hannah to talk more because that was a great.
Sure, I'll shut the fuck up. Sure, Hannah.
No, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No,
Aaron,
I'm just a guy who just goes fuck it. I'm gonna start talking. Whoopity-woo! Look at my gums are flapping.
No, totally. Maybe we just need you to come back and do more episodes.
Yeah, that's what we need.
Do more. Yeah.
I do have a question. It was actually from a viewer. For Peter. It was back when we originally were supposed to have Peter, but they had a question specifically for Peter, and it's Mad MNC on TikTok asked, "How do you manage to keep living and be hopeful when you know how bad our climate is and the governments aren't doing anything about it?" So basically, like how do you just keep going? Because it's
over the last couple of years, I realized I was actually starting to get depressed. I read it as burnout at first, but then eventually I do therapy every week, and it sort of started to become clear that. So when I was in college, I had a really severe depression that was very intense, and I've been, my whole adult life since then, I've made it a really big priority to not let myself slip back into that kind of depression. But this took me by kind of snuck up on me because it was much lower level. It wasn't as intense, and it kind of like slowly grew over time. It's not the only, I feel like I'm cornered now. Well, anyway, I did start taking.
Look, you're laughing.
I did start taking bupropion, which is Wellbutrin, like a couple of months ago. I think that helped. That's not probably what they want to hear. I've started learning how to play the violin, which is also probably what they don't want to hear because it's like very fiddling while.
I think they want to hear exactly what you're doing.
And now Peter is going to pick up the violin and play us.
Wait,
oh my God, I would
you're North
torture you so
Carolina.
much.
That's a
It
fiddle.
doesn't sound good at all yet, but
It's a fiddle. He's definitely learning to play the fiddle, not the violin.
I am learning to play the fiddle, but it gives
bring
me a
up
lot
your
of
fiddle. Well, I'll get my banjo. We can have a.
It gives me a lot of joy, but then the deeper answer is really community, and trying to really prioritize that, and that practice of going into community gets kind of deeper. As I go, like I learn how to do it more and more, and it gets more and more satisfying. And there's a lot of different ways to do that. Yeah, I wish I had a better
answer. It's such a very
answer.
individualistic culture that it's very hard to even just have a conversation with your neighbors when that used to be just something you did normally.
But I think the way forward, first of all, there's not one way forward. There's 1,000 ways forward, and we're not going to get into all of that now. But I think that's why, we've talked about this offline as well, Peter, but we talk about it a lot here, why land back is so important, that indigenous peoples who have a relationship to a land, getting control of that land back and being able to restore it is critical for justice, but also for life on Earth. There's going to be many, many different strategies. But I think we are in the period where those centuries of colonial rule and extractivism and capitalism are crashing to an end one way or the other. And in that failure, there's also opportunity, and that is going to involve people coming together to solve their problems. Mutual aid, we see it.
Totally.
They are worsening the climate crisis, and they are destroying our ability to predict, measure, and respond to it. They fired the call centers that took FEMA calls during the Texas floods, and it went from 97% of calls answered to 18% of calls answered the weekend of the flood. Right. So they are destroying the ability of the government to do it. We need to replace that and repair it.
Yeah.
But it also
We're
means
losing
people
insurance too.
Insurance is gone.
All
People are
these
going to need
systems,
to come together as communities to protect themselves, to start solving things. I think, again, the Mamdani campaign mobilized the young men that everyone's been worried about getting alienated from politics. They were out in the street talking to people, excited because he was actually talking about their lives. So I think that there's a huge opportunity and a need to build up community in very practical things about how do we make more resilient, healthy communities that can go across partisan lines, but also in terms of larger political movements that challenge these things. And the labor movement, so critical that workers are able to organize to actually, that's how we reverse the flow of wealth. But that's also community, right? Collective organizing is community.
And things are changing, and it's possible that this like flirtation with fascism, hopefully that's all it is in this country, is going to like its ultimate. Sure, it's gonna it's gonna make us end up, hopefully not more than a few tenths of a degree hotter than we otherwise would, and that's tragic. That's going to be really, really bad. But hopefully, ultimately what it could do, and this is like ridiculous optimism, right? Is wake a lot of people up. But people are to how bad this system has been and how gaslit we've been by both by the two-party system in this country. How we need to literally look at the Constitution and rewrite it. Right? There's a lot of things we need to shore up there that part of the things that have contributed to getting us in this bind right now. So there is, and I think a lot more people, a few years ago when I was active on Twitter, I would sometimes tweet stuff about how capitalism was a huge problem, and it didn't go down very well. I think now a lot more people have started to realize that capitalism really is, this extractive colonial capitalism really is a problem, and that all of these issues that, like a few years ago on Twitter, you'd have the people that would be laser focused on, healthcare reform, for example, or this or that issue. And I think, but they wouldn't be talking about capitalism, really. They'd be talking about voting harder for the Democrats mainly. I think a lot of those people have shifted from vote harder to like, actually, maybe the whole system is fucked. And it's just been like this vote harder thing has been a way to kind of keep us in line. And so I'm optimistic cautiously that, again, like this bid for fascism is going to fail because Trump is not popular, because the United States has a long history of like at least paying lip service to democracy, right? That's not something Germany had. Germany was coming out of basically a monarchy, and they were trying this new thing, democracy, and it wasn't going too well for them. And then suddenly Hitler comes into power. So there's a lot of things that are different now. On the other hand, we have like a surveillance state, like technological capabilities, facial recognition that the Nazis didn't have. So that's, so it's unclear what's going to happen, but people are absolutely waking up. Luigi Mamdani, like little indicators just saying that people are starting to get really fed up with basically being raped and pillaged by the billionaire class, and they're not going to stand for it anymore.
Something that really gives me a lot of optimism is, so growing up, most of the people that I've spoken to, actually everyone I know, was educated on the fact that humans have always had some kind of currency or trade system. But new studies in the last few years and research about human civilization before like 2,000 years ago, it indicates that wasn't necessary. Capitalism isn't necessary. You could argue, like with all the integrated global systems we've developed, all the infrastructure, it might be necessary to maintain that at this point, but fundamentally, it's not necessary for humans to exist and thrive together. We can just take care of each other. That's what we used to do.
Also,
exactly.
there's a difference between
the priorities have gotten fucked up. Like, does all that plastic dog shit coming over in containers make us happier anyway, right? Like, what really makes us happy, right?
Connection.
And it's plastic dog shit.
Exactly.
There's a big difference also between capitalism and markets, right?
Right.
It is reasonable that in a planet with 7 billion people
happens.
Well, that you may use markets as a tool of gauging where supply and demand, there's a function for that. Markets is not the same as capitalism. Right. Capitalism is about the need for endless growth and greater concentrations of wealth and evisceration of everything else that's built in. Potentially, how markets can play a role in understanding where you need to put things, completely separate question that a future society could have all sorts of conversations about. And those should just be split completely down the middle. All we're talking about is, do we have a system that's designed to concentrate wealth at the cost of potentially all life on the planet? Or do we shift that priority towards social good? That's all socialism is, right? Socialism is, thank God in this country, it's finally becoming less of a scary term to millions of people, which is the social needs. Put the social needs first. How can the most people thrive? How can society thrive for the longest amount of time? Yeah. That's the difference of it. Now, whether a market's part of that or not, let's figure it out, right? But that's where the back of a system that concentrates the wealth with the money created by that system has to be broken one way or the other.
Yeah. And also, like, think about the view of Earth from space for a moment. I don't think that the system that we have now, with all of these artificial lines on maps and all these nuclear weapons to kind of like preserve those lines on maps, I don't think that's the final form of humans' presence on Earth. I think we're actually in a weird way kind of in a little bit of we kind of made some wrong turns, right? And a lot of indigenous cultures had things figured out a lot better than having these lines on maps and nuclear weapons that we have now, and all of this like fear that these politicians and billionaires use to control us, all these patriarchal religions, you know. So I think it's possible in the long term to imagine like a kind of John Lennon, right? Like, to imagine something that is quite a bit different than that. And again, like I really just hope that I live long enough to see some of that stuff start to happen. That's my.
You make a good point, Peter. We should give indigenous nations nuclear.
I was just gonna say, I'm like, hey, if you would have gave my people, the Navajo, a nuke back in like 1820 when Kit Carson's ass was walking around, be a lot different story.
Back with nuclear weapons. We're gonna protect this shit.
Yeah.
Well, you guys, I should probably go now, but I would love to come back at some point.
Yeah, of course.
Anytime.
Yeah.
Please do.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Me, you guys.
Always.
All right. Bye.
Great. See ya.
Thank you for listening to Doom Scroll Patrol. Like, comment, and subscribe to Undeniable Network for more content and to support our work.